Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Lowdown. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by one of my favorite authors and author of Legacy, that is Mr. James Kerr. James, a big warm welcome to the show.
Connor, it's a privilege. It's a pleasure to be here.
James, I said I wouldn't do you a disservice by inviting you on, so I'm going to begin with the big hard-hitting questions first. Um, you said on a few previous pods, begin with the end of mind. It's a huge
Yeah.
operating principle of yours. What does this mean for you both professionally and personally?
Well, it's not my original line. I'll hasten to add. It's a Stephen Covey line, I think, but I think um, it's in there with sort of strategy and purpose and vision. Where are we heading? There's some fantastic research that's been done about just the power of the visual in vision, and put in a more populist way, if we can see, we can be. If we can see where we're aimed at, we're a lot more likely to get there, both individually and collectively. So a big part of my work with teams has been around, how do we paint that vivid picture of the future? If we a line somebody used is, no one ever won an Oscar without first kind of pretending to receive an Oscar in their bedroom mirror. We kind of have the self-fulfilling prophecy is about our ability to kind of finish the picture somehow. And I think it's a very powerful way to create intention and purpose and a sense of direction. Um, in a collective environment, it's called cognitive congruence. All the minds are pointing in the same direction. So I think in all sorts of motivational aspects, it's whether it's individual or it's collective, having a vivid vision of where you're going really matters. I think for me, it can be around imagining a book, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it might feel like in my hand as I set off to write it. There's an interesting thing that the word idea it comes from the root idea or idea, which is to see. That when we have an idea, we kind of almost see things in their entirety. Or certainly I do. I can see a book idea and I go, or you can sort of see the end. You can see a team hoisting a particular cup. If you can see, you can be. And so for me, I think it's a guiding principle about creating guiding principles, if that makes sense. Being able to create a compelling, vivid vision of what you want to bring about, and then you figure out the how to get there. But you kind of got to know where you're aiming, and so beginning at the end in mind, I think, becomes a hugely important principle in getting stuff done and getting stuff done together.
And visualization has obviously played a huge role, a prominent role in your own career, James, to date. And a huge aspect of that has been the tool and the art of storytelling. Um, you were once a former advertiser before you moved into the leadership field. Knowing
Mm.
storytelling to be such a huge prominent feature of legacy in your subsequent work since, James, why are stories important?
Wow, why are stories important? I think, why do kids watch Disney movies over and over and over and over again? Because they teach. We see ourselves in stories. We contextualize our lives through stories, I think. Why is the Bible or any religious text filled with stories, parables? Parables and proverbs. Stories and what they mean. Aesop's tales. Stories of rabbits and tortoises and so on, going about their day, become kind of emblematic and stories of how we might live. And so I think they're probably the most primal instructor. They both inspire and they instruct. Um, and they rewire us in many ways. If you think about cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, or the neuro-linguistic program was a sort of a big thing for a while and still is in many ways. That idea that the way we frame our experience, the map we make of the territory, kind of defines our response to that territory. So from a leadership point of view, it's one of the most powerful levers that we have, is that ability. I talked about visualization. It's a form of storytelling, or that form of visualization. There are different aspects of it, but are a form of storytelling. Visualization, a skier at the top of a mountain rehearsing in their mind how they're going to ski downhill, is another form of storytelling. We're kind of creating a kind of future action through the way we tell that story to ourselves. And so stories are vehicles for beliefs, I think. And belief leads to behavior. And I think it's very much belief leads to behavior through the way we articulate who we are, what we stand for, where we're going, why it matters. All of those aspects. We create a narrative that we live into. Those stories become a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways, I think. And I have a line that the story you tell yourself becomes the story that others tell about you. In programming, in computer programming, they say, garbage in, garbage out. If you put rubbish data on the and as an input, you get rubbish coming out on the output. But if you put a great story in as input, you tend to get a better result as an output. So if you get a story where you're, rather than being selfish, you're selfless, rather than being kind of, opportunistic, you have some, principles. If you have, rather than just being kind of pragmatic, you're more purposeful, for instance, you'll tend to get more purpose-oriented, more principled, better outcomes. So that story that we tell ourselves, our self-talk, and the talk with which we address our teams, if you like, becomes hugely powerful and important, I think, and really right at the heart of the way we connect to ourselves and to other individuals. Bill Walsh, a great coach from the San Francisco 49ers, said something like, his main job, or one of his main jobs, was to influence the self-talk of his athletes. And if you think about what's a team talk, what's a tactical session, really you are telling a story and trying to imprint a story of what we are going to do here together in the minds of your people. So storytelling is everything and anything, I think, in many ways. Steve Jobs said, words to the effect of, he who has or he or she who has the best story will win. And you look at the Apple story, for instance, putting a dent in the universe, being insanely great. Some of the language around that, you kind of get it, and you get it intuitively and instinctively. And I think that's possibly, sorry, a very long answer to a short question, but I think that's probably the other aspect too. Stories impact you emotionally, people emotionally. Stories well told. Aristotle said there were three aspects. There's ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos is credible. Logos doesn't make sense, but pathos doesn't move me. And if you want to move people, motivate people, have people move in a certain direction, shape the outcome, then the emotion is what does it, and is a large part of what does it. And stories have this ability to kind of, capture hearts and change minds, but capture hearts. And so it's an essential part of the leader's toolkit. It's the essential part of every human being's toolkit. It's an essential part of a podcast. That's what we're doing now. I think it's probably why people are listening to this podcast. They want to hear what the story is, what's going on. It's kind of how we get inspired, how we get information. where we get insights, and like those kids watching Disney movies over and over again, it's how we learn. So that's my take on storytelling.
It's a fantastic take at that, James.
The end. I'll put it at the end just to say it was a story. To be
It's
continued.
it's fascinating in the fact that it's there's nearly 100% correlation there in terms of great storytellers are also great leaders, and they're able to recount stories past and stories of the future, and they set on the paradigm of the space-time perception that we as humans can only account of.
Yeah.
And it must have been fascinating for yourself to be able to be offered a lens into the camp of the All Blacks, indeed your own home country, James, and recount that story in the fascinating book titled Legacy. How did that project come to fruition?
Uh, well, it was a number of factors, I think. It took a long time. It took about 4 years to sell my story, if you like. It was about timing. It was the right time for the team to do it. I came in to do a book. The first book I did was a book called Mana, just like the spirit inside the All Blacks. And I worked with a photographer called Nick Danziger, a fantastic photojournalist, and we wanted to tell the words and the pictures in a way. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up becoming fascinated, knowing there was more of a story to tell, which I told in the form of Legacy. And really, Legacy was a coming together of a number of things. I'd worked with in sport and business as a storyteller. Really, I came up through advertising. Worked with brand identity and was an identity consultant for a long time. But I also had this high performance side to me. And really, I saw the All Blacks as emblematic of a story that I think I knew well as a New Zealander. And I had an affinity with it. But it also lined up with a lot of the work that I'd done in larger organizational change, which really, and that sort of fascination I had with culture change and establishing a culture and what that might mean and what a good culture is. And so I saw it as a sort of a confluence of two tributaries into one river that was called Legacy. One was the All Black tributary, and the other one was my personal experience. And I tried to bring those together into something that would be useful for people, inspiring, informative, hopefully insightful, but also insightful as in to incite action, to try to create something that could create personal shifts, if you like. And so really it was about a coming together, of all of those elements. And of course, it's a story about the All Blacks, and anyone who knows a Kiwi knows that, that the All Blacks are the pantheon of the gods, and the emblematic of what it really means to be the best of New Zealand in many ways. And there's huge pride in that ability of this, it's a small island nation on the other side of the world that can take on the rest of the world and keep on winning. So there's huge pride and a sense of national belonging and identity that comes into that. So I wanted to kind of try to represent all of that, I think, in that story.
I think, your time there with the All Blacks transversed at a time as well where there was a huge understanding as to how over time the country, not only in a rugby field, but off it too, had reframed winning. And there's a fantastic anecdote in the book to this, and it goes like winning takes talent, to continue takes character. And I think this book, Legacy, James, best encapsulates that arc of the New Zealand rugby team, the All Blacks, in fact, essentially reframing what it takes to be an All Black.
Yeah. Well, cultures either stagnate or they regenerate, I think. And I think the story I wanted to tell was one of regeneration. There was a particular group of leaders under Graham Henry, now Sir Graham Henry, including Wayne Smith, including Gilbert Anoka, including Steve Hansen, but more broadly, than that. And also within the team, clustered around Richie McCaw, of some very, I would say, very thoughtful rugby men. And those phrases don't always go together, but very thoughtful, emotionally intelligent. And at a time of great change, the game had become professional. There was a different demographic entering the frame, both in generational, but also in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the Pacifica element coming in. So some of the sort of truisms of what the All Blacks had always been were maybe becoming redundant or old-fashioned, very hierarchical, quite command and control, and they really needed to create a culture that reflected the time, but also reflected, what we kind of now know are the essentials for a great group. Culture, and this, I'm not speaking their script, I'm just my take on it is, culture is a really interesting word in that it comes from the same Latin root as to cultivate. The cultura animus, Cicero, the first coined the phrase. It's a place that people should grow. Now, if you take that to its conclusion, that what you're trying to do is you're trying to create an environment in which human performers, athletes in this case, but we can take it more broadly than that, are able to become what they're capable of becoming, I think is the phrase. I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson said, or become themselves in whichever direction that they happen to grow, to be able to express their talents, both professional and personal, to become leaders, to grow up, if you like. The All Blacks talked about better people make better All Blacks. There's only so many tackle bags you can have, right? There's only so many, cones you can put out and formations you can practice and small pitch games you can do and, goalkeeping practice you can do and all of that. On a coaching level, there's only so much. But what the military would call a force multiplier is decision-making, leadership, connection, camaraderie, got each other's back. As you know, most sports people, they spend only a tiny fraction of their life actually competing. Most of the time we spend doing other stuff, training or not training, right? And so it makes a lot more sense that actually the area that you can have a huge amount of influence on, a force multiplication influence, is when you're not on the paddock, when you're not on the pitch. That's hugely important, of course, but if your entire framework is 90 minutes or whatever it is, on a Saturday or on a Sunday, and that's all there is to coaching, all there is to leadership, then you're missing, the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of minutes there are not on Saturday or Sunday. So culture acts on that, and you go, well, where are people at their best? How do people grow? And if you take the sort of humanistic tradition, the Maslow, and that our urge is, we have a will to self-actualize, to become what we're capable of becoming, to grow, really, to become ourselves. You go, well, how do you optimize the conditions for that to happen? Has got to be the sort of first principles question on that. How do you optimize? And you go, well, what do people need in order to grow? And if you take self-determination theory, it comes down to three things. It comes down to competence, or let's call it mastery, autonomy, and relatedness. And there are other aspects, but let's just focus on those. Mastery. Will they become the best footballer that they can be, or the best rugby player they can be, or the best tennis player they can be? Are you giving them a pathway to mastery? And that's sort of coaching 101. That's the skill set and the skill acquisition and all of that. And that's one aspect of it. There's another aspect, which is autonomy. And that's really, I think, that's leadership, really. It's responsibility, it's ownership, it's accountability, it's agency, it's all of those things. And better people make better All Blacks. The phrase that I heard around the camp is, do you have your hand out or do you have your hand up? Are you a leader? Do you have a dependent mindset or a responsible, accountable mindset, an independent mindset? Are you a decision taker or a decision maker? Are you a follower or a leader? And that comes down to autonomy and creating, as coaches, if you like, leaders, the environment that you're not micromanaging, you're not picking on fault, you're allowing people to grow themselves, if you like, and that uses a lot of asking good questions, guidance, all of that kind of stuff. And the third aspect is relatedness, connection, human connection. Am I, as a coach, as a leader, connected to my people, really? Do I know them more than just superficially? Were they objects to be moved around for me? Do they know each other? So they connected to each other, usually around a cause that matters to everybody, common cause. That everybody working towards common cause makes a huge amount of sense. And so that level of connectedness as a group becomes hugely important. It creates belonging, psychological safety. No one gets left behind. Care, compassion, love, brotherhood, fellowship, band of brothers and sisters, band of sisters, the sisterhood, whatever it is, that collective sense of us and the cohesion that comes from that, which is hugely important. So are they the optimum conditions for people to grow and become better than they would be? Well, we're pretty much there in a sense, and so creating the environment for human beings to grow and being a gardener, not an engineer, it's been called, rather than trying to engineer results, can you grow results from the inside by growing those connections, growing that mastery, and growing human beings from being dependent to independent to be a team of leaders? It's a pretty good equation to build a great group.
It's fascinating there, and it gives food for thought, James. And it's fascinating when you speak of self-determination theory because I think it segues nicely into a couple of the key lessons which I ascertained from the book. And there's a few which I'd like to read out to you, and then hopefully they
Sure.
serve up as anecdotes and we can go back and forth.
This is the part I've been dreading because I have to remember what I wrote and I have to stand by it now. So go on, shoot.
Fantastic. So the first lesson is that of character. Better people make better All Blacks.
Yeah.
Why is sweeping the sheds important?
Well, sweeping the sheds, I think it is an antidote to the real enemy of high performance, which is entitlement. And I've said this before somewhere, but unearned glory. Someone owes me. Of course, with a better team, of course we're going to win. Complacency comes from that. Lack of preparation comes from it. Right? Humility. The humility to do the basics, to do jobs that if you get arrogant, you start to think are beneath you. Keep your feet on the ground and they keep you humble. But if you're humble, you're hungry. You're hungry, and you've got that what in the Eastern traditions would be called a beginner's mind, a novice mindset. You're not expecting anything, you're generating whatever is. And so there's accountability and responsibility, and all of that comes from an act like that. It's an act of self-reliance. I think the phrase I use in the book is, no one takes care of the All Blacks can take care of themselves. You're not expecting somebody to come and kind of, mop your face, wipe up after yourself. You do it yourself, because that's leadership, isn't it? Taking responsibility. It's self-reliance is hugely, hugely important. You do get a bit soft if everyone's taking care of you. I won't name names, but there's the story of team that came to New Zealand, and they had gap year students come in and iron their dress shirts at just after half time to make sure they had nicely ironed shirts to get into. And the All Blacks bus driver was shocked by this, because he's going, how do you expect them to stand on their own 2 feet if you do it all for them? You know, Rio Ferdinand and out of Manchester United at the time said, you know, being in United at the time was being like a wildebeest. You were just herded from watering hole to watering hole. You didn't have responsibility. You didn't self-reliance. Now they did pretty well as a group, but they did very well as a group. But it's not necessarily the way that you create maturity, create leadership. You know, owning your stuff. Also, what better metaphor for a legacy, for leaving the jersey in a better place, which is one of the core ideas within that All Black culture, ethos, than leaving the sheds, the locker rooms in a decent state. You know, it ties into that idea of legacy, you know, leaving that shirt in a better place, leaving the jersey in a better place. So, you know, what better metaphor is that than just taking care of business? So I think it's one of the most powerful things around ritual, of which that is a kind of ritual, is that it embodies a whole belief system. And I think sweeping the sheds, that is an idea, embodies a lot of those core values within that environment. And those values are what is valued. That is what a good character looks like. Ethos means characteristic spirit. It's about character. And the quote I think you used before, which is a version of, you know, that I think it might have been, I think it was John Wooden, or it might have been Michael Jordan. I think people have said various versions of the same thing, is that, you know, talent will win you a game, but character wins tournaments. It's character means that when things don't go right, you do it right. You know, it means that that you make good decisions off the field. You know, you don't have that drink, or you train just that little bit harder, or you get that night's sleep, or whatever it is. So those small decisions and the marginal gains that come from character are huge. But also people follow your example. People of good character, they follow your example. But it tends to be about focus and intention, doing the right thing on a difficult day, all of that kind of stuff. You know, it's a sustainable model for success. You're not kidding yourself. There isn't a disconnect with who you're pretending to be and who you are. You can bring yourself fully to the game. And I think they are the, you know, critical non-essentials. They're the intangibles that kind of make champions in a way. It's your preparedness to do what maybe other people aren't prepared to do, or not to do what other people are prepared to do. That over time, in a cumulative way, in a marginal gains kind of way, lead to breakthrough results. So I think it's a very important thing. And listen, it's no coincidence that a special force unit focuses on the character of the special force operator in the same way as the All Blacks do. In the same way as you know, one would hope you would want to be as a father, you know, as a mother, as a parent. You'd sort of want your politicians to be that, but we've probably given up on that. You know, good character counts. And you know, it might even go back, if you think about, you know, Marcus Aurelius, or you go back to those ancient times, the entire point of life was a pursuit of virtue. The idea of virtue, you know, courage and moderation and fairness and, you know, justice and all of these values. So it's a very powerful kind of ethical theme, And I think there's a lot, ethics really are kind of rules of living, you know, in a sort of principles of living, maybe not rules, but principles of living. And I think they have a real reason, because they enable groups to function well. And if you're in a team game, you know, you win or lose by how well your team functions. And so your character is going to be part of your contribution to a collective effort. You know, are you doing the right thing by yourself and by the people you're with? I think is a really important question, and not in a kind of Boy Scouts kind of way, but in a you know, goody two shoes kind of way. But in a, are you really committed to this? Are you really committed to your own success? Are you really committed to yourself? Are you taking, you know, your pursuit seriously, not yourself, because a sense of humor and ability to laugh at yourself is a good part of character. But are you prepared to invest what it takes to get the job done? And I think anyone competing at a high level, you know, I know the listenership here is, you know, interested in that. You know, are you kidding yourself, or are you bringing yourself fully to what your pursuit is? And that takes real character. You know, you might have to sacrifice some comfort. That takes real character. You might have to sacrifice distractions. That takes real character. You might have to not react when something terribly unfair happens. When the referee makes a terrible decision, do you have the character to take it on the chin and to win the game anyway? All of those are character decisions. And character, talent is fine, but without character, it's going to go nowhere. You need the talent, you know, but you need the character as a force multiplier to that talent. So I think that's why it's so important.
Absolutely enlightening. And similarly, at the same time, it fits in nicely to the subsequent lesson, which is that of responsibility. And former All Black Wayne Smith had a tremendous quote, which I'll touch upon here now, James. And, you know, he speaks about people rise to a challenge if it's their challenge. Leaders create leaders.
Yeah. Responsibility and ownership and accountability, you know, massive, and you know, is all around leadership, really. Smithy, former player, you know, he's known as the professor, and a fantastic human being, and really incredibly influential within that group. And that phrase, I think, says it all. I think it's one of the most insightful phrases in leadership that I've come across, is that people rise to a challenge if it's their challenge. You can coach all you want. You can tell people the result that you want, but unless people own it, they feel it inside, they're intrinsically motivated, they will, you know, they're not going to move in that direction. So by what I call pass the ball, handing, you know, you grow leaders by giving them more responsibility. You empower people by giving away your power. You know, you got to hand it over, delegate, because, you know, that's when people grow. And but also that's when people own stuff. You know, you can tell people as much as you want, whatever you want, it'll go one ear and out the other. But if you ask them what they think is the right thing, that Socratic inquiry means they'll internalize it. They've got to search inside themselves and come up with an answer. They've got to articulate that answer, you know, to themselves and to others. And once they've done that search inside and articulated it and spoken it into existence, you know, they'll own that. They'll tend to want to, you know, the joke I made is, you know, stay up late and order pizzas, you know, get the job done, because it was their idea, or it feels like it's their idea. And it was their idea, and they got their fingerprints on it, and they've got skin in the game, for want of a better cliche. And that's really a massive part of creating the connection and the common cause, I think, of any group. And, you know, anyone who's a parent knows that that's the way to go. If you say, you know, it's time to get into bed, or get into bed, chances are the child will find every reason not to. But if you can somehow make it their idea. Hey, how are you feeling? What might be the best way to do this? Would it be nice to curl up somewhere warm and read a book? I know. I'll go to bed. Now it happens about once in a blue moon, but hopefully you get the point. It's like, yeah, you've created a coalition of the willing then. So responsibility, and it's a two-way street. It's taking responsibility and it's handing over responsibility, but it is where people grow, it's where people own things, and it's really about creating, in a team environment, what's called a distributed leadership model, leadership at every level. Rather than thinking there's a boss and a whole bunch of followers, it's a team of leaders. I call it, one captain, but 15 leaders, in a rugby context, or one captain, 11 leaders. What you want is 11 people who are able to make, strategic decisions on a tactical level. They know their part in a plan. They know what the plan is, and they know what their part in that plan is. And therefore, when the situation changes, they're able, on their tactical level, they're able to make a decision that's really good in terms of the big picture. And it's important in sport. It's very important in the military. They call it the strategic corporal. If you're out there and you start shooting at the wrong time, you can start World War III. You've got to know the big picture as well as your own individual role. And so empowering people, trusting people as leaders, building leaders, handing over significant responsibility at that point of information is really critical.
And inevitably, your character and your very being is going to be stress tested at times, and it will be called into question. Reading the book, the All Blacks seemingly have this uncanny ability to deal with pressure, especially in adverse situations. And reading one quote here: by controlling our attention, we control our performance. By controlling our performance, we control the game. And James, I think what it comes back to here is it's quite poignant to me that the All Blacks, their use of mantras, they almost serve as mental roadmaps in times of great stress and pressure.
Well, we talked about storytelling. One of the oldest form of storytelling, I think I mentioned as parables and proverbs. What's the story and what's the proverb? What's the hook? That's a mantra, really, a maxim, an aphorism. In Hinduism, they have what's called sutras, and sutras are the sort of small aphoristic statements of belief. And sutra means thread. They're the way we weave our belief system together. So I think having hooks to hang ideas on is incredibly important and powerful. And it's not just the All Blacks who are able to encapsulate those beliefs into small phrases. I think great teams have what I call a common but uncommon language. A way they speak that is specific to that environment. There's a special force unit, and they talk about loyal dissent, for instance. It's important to be loyal to the mission, but dissent is also important. And that's about psychological safety and making sure the stuff that needs to be said, but it's a hook to hang it on. Because you can say, listen, bit of loyal dissent here. Boom. Amazon talk similarly, about disagree and commit, right? It's important to disagree. It's equally important when the time comes to commit to whatever the decision is. Now, they're little phrases that you can hang your ideas on and also become a common language that you can work with people. And of course, that matters the most in a pressure situation. You need shortcuts. You need heuristics that take you to the right action at the right time. And so, those sort of simple battle cries out in the military zone, or, you said the All Blacks seem to be masters at mastering pressure. I would say 24 years of World Cup pain, they weren't. You know, they really weren't for 24 years. They choked. They were being started to be seen as chokers. Because when they were world champions between World Cups. Then when it came to the knockout phases of the World Cups, they lost. And this came to a head in 2007, where they got eliminated from the Rugby World Cup by the French in the quarterfinals. And a number of factors came into play, but they lost, and they worked very, very hard on pressure, and they defined what pressure is. Pressure is a privilege. It's a Billie Jean King phrase. Again, they took this phrase and used it. Billie Jean King phrase. Pressure is a privilege. You want to embrace those expectations. You want to, in the military, they say you want to run to the sound of the guns. We might know it in Proverbs as grasp the nettle. So you can see these phrases hold that same sort of idea. And now we all know what that means then. And so we're all able to grasp the nettle, run to the sound of the guns, embrace expectations, because pressure is a privilege kind of thing. So these simple sutras are threads that weave an understanding, collective understanding together. And that's a very powerful way it's a very powerful thing to introduce that kind of language into an environment, because it becomes a shorthand for expectations, for norms, for beliefs, for behavior, and trigger words for the right thing to do on a difficult day when you're under pressure. So, and then of course the All Blacks worked very, very hard, and Gilbert Enoka, the mental skills coach, who's done a remarkable job. He has just retired. He's been within the All Blacks for nearly half. They've competed in something like 660, or I can't remember the exact number, tests. He's been there for roughly 330 of them, pretty much half of them. And the most successful half, they were successful already, but they've been remarkably successful recently. And but he very swiftly recognized that there was a problem of pressure, that they were choking at this point. And they had an opportunity, and they brought in a guy called Kerr Evans, who is now the new mental skills coach in the All Black. He's taken over where Gilbert left off, interestingly. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in the position. And he introduced an idea called red head, blue head. Red head, you're choking. Best way I can describe this is, you're late for a meeting, you're on the road, you're driving, you're wondering what's going to happen when you get here. And at the moment that you're wondering, you get T-boned from the side by a car coming out of a side street because your mind's not on the road. It's out there in some imaginary land that hasn't even happened yet. Right? Future-faced thinking, total distraction, your control of attention is poor. Or blue head, which is your control of attention is on task. In the moment, horizon opens up, time slows down. You execute under pressure. You see the car coming out from the side, you avoid it. Somebody passes you the ball, you don't drop it, because your mind's in the game. Now that's about the control of attention, and of course where we put our attention is what really matters in all things. Whether we put our attention on doing good work or bad work, on being arrogant or being humble, where do we focus our mind? Of course, so there are bigger things, but just on a task, on a performance level, are you able to, the cliches, control the controllables, shut out the noise, separate signal from noise down to the stuff that makes a real difference? And of course, and when you lose that, when you come off, we all have these intrusive thoughts. You're up 1-0 in the most important game of your life as a football player, soccer player. You can't help but be going, gee, I hope they don't score. I hope they don't score. Then you might go, don't pass it to me. Don't pass it to me. I don't want the responsibility, right? And of course, that's the point that somebody passes it to you, and you're so busy thinking those thoughts that you stuff it up. There's an intercept, they score, equalize, they win an extra time. right? You know, those moments matter. Where you're putting your attention really matters. But if you're in that situation as you're going, embrace expectation. Pressure is a privilege. Pass me the ball. I'm going to make sure I'm going to do right by this. No one's going to win this ball off me, however hard they're pressing. I'm going to own this ball. No one's going to do it. And you're not even thinking that. What you're thinking is just ball, 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 football, football. Da, 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 da. You're in that moment. You're with that ball. You're on task. Then you're in a much stronger, better place. Your attention is where it can make a difference in the game. And that's that's mental strength, really. You know, we're all going to feel the pressure. We're all going to have those intrusive thoughts. We're all going to think, if I get the ball, we'll lose, or maybe we'll lose. You know, all of those thoughts are always going to come up. It's your ability to shift your attention from an unresourceful state to a resourceful state, from inattentive to attentive, from off task to on task, from red to blue. That will define your ability to perform in that moment on the paddock under pressure. And of course, in a sporting context, that's what we need to do.
I think underpinning all of this, James, I'm just scribbling away in my notes, there's a question of meaning, and
Yeah.
it's linked to the concept of Whakapapa. But for me, Whakapapa, it's nearly less about the concept and more about shifting your attention as an athlete, coach, performer from what is this all in service of to who is all of this in service of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, you know, Whakapapa is it's a beautiful word, and it means a beautiful idea. And it's really about lineage, genealogy. You know, we're all part of this long unbroken chain of people, and we have this moment in the sun. And how are we going to, what will our contribution be? You know, this is our moment, and what will our contribution be? And of course, ties into the idea of legacy. What do we leave behind us after we're gone? You know, but what will our, you know, how will we represent our lineage? And maybe most importantly, how will we represent those who come after? And I think that shift of attention again from what's in it for me, what can I get, to what can I give, is, you know, what will my contribution be, is a sort of a bigger picture version of hand out or hand up, you know, and it works on, you know, multiple levels. It works on the level of works on multiple levels. Works on the level of what am I doing with this life I've got? You know, am I living a life of significance, of meaning? You know, and you know, that's a question that should haunt us occasionally, because I think what it does is that it means that we focus our attention on the stuff that really matters. It can be really easy to take the easy way out. You know, like I write books. I love writing books, but I hate writing books. You know, it's hard work. You know, it challenges your limits all the time. You know, it's what gets called type 2 fun. You know, it's the kind of fun you have once you've done it, but at the time it's work. But there's a degree of contribution, I think, that helps me get through the tough times. And I say this having not published for quite a long time, but I've got the books ready to go. But you know, it helps make it, the times that it all just seems difficult, worthwhile, because there's a bigger meaning. You know, Nietzsche said, if you have a strong enough why, you can overcome any how. You know, if you've got a kind of something to live for, you will. You know, I think that higher performance comes from higher purpose to a degree. You know, if say we talked about the military a lot in this conversation, but you know, you wouldn't necessarily go and throw yourself into the line of fire if you didn't have a pretty good purpose, pretty good reason to. And that might be, you know, king and country, or, you know, for the commander-in-chief, or whatever. But actually, I think your purpose is actually much more down into representing your crew, your people, human connection. And one of my favorite lines around this is and it overlaps with legacy, and the idea of legacy is that a Pericles quote, that our achievements aren't written on stone monuments, they're woven into the lives of others. And so our contribution to the people that we work with, that we work alongside, our families, our friends, if we live in a state of some sort of service, I guess, of contribution, we get paid back in spades. We're not suckers. We're not, we're not giving it away for nothing. All the rewards. If you want to be loved, love. If you want to take value, create value. If you want to be, if you want to get something from a team, give something to that team. And that's the equation. That there's a reciprocity, I think, that happens in life. The more you give to something, the more, and it's not always a straight line, but the more you give something, the more love you put into writing a book, for instance, the more likely that book is to be loved. The more you love the craft of football, say, or rugby, or cricket, or baseball, or basketball, or business, or teaching, or whatever it is, the more you love the craft, the better you're going to get, and the more rewards are going to come your way. And it doesn't really work the other way. If you're thinking, what can I get out of this? What can I get out of this? I think you get found out pretty quickly in all avenues of life. Your level of commitment and contribution, which is part of your character, will define the outcome often. And it won't always go your way, but it's just more, you're setting a trajectory in the right direction, I think. And so I think that contributive mindset, that service mindset, is a large part of on the meta level, thinking about what your contribution to this moment in human history is they're really, really good questions. And I think you've just got to make sure they're not kind of Miss World questions, world peace and mung beans. They need to be something that you can do that no one else can do, as the phrase goes. And how can you be useful? How can you make a difference to other people? Because that's where the real juice of life is. I think that's where meaning comes from. I think that's a satisfying life. But it's also a very successful life, because the more value you create, the more you're valued in society generally. And when you're valued, real material value comes from that, social value comes from that. But be valuable, be useful, make a contribution. What can you give? What can you give to other people in any given situation is a really powerful place to stand in any life. You don't write books for yourself. I don't anyway. I enjoy it and I write the books I want to write, but I want other people to benefit. And to me, that satisfies a lot of those things. And I'm not holding myself up as the arbiter of this, but I just think if there's one thing I've learned in life, the more you give, the more you get. And I think that's a large part of Whakapapa and a large part of legacy, that sense of contribution, that servant leader mindset.
Same with that sense of contribution. I mean, evidently, you've done quite extensive research from giants in the sports field, military, some obviously ancient giants of philosophy there we've gone through over the past hour, James. However, we're obviously in an age of disruption. I know that's something that you studied extensively too, be it the VUCA climate, which we're in currently. How can anyone who's in charge of leadership and development practices within their own sectors, I would suppose, how ought they begin to act and crystallize some of these lessons which we've touched upon today?
Well, I think I think for me, I would start with that idea of ethos, and ethos means character actually, and the characteristic spirit. And I think, what do you stand for and what won't you? Get down to that core values, if you like. Know thyself. It's the most ancient You know what you stand for, what you won't, where you're going, you know, that vivid vision of where you're going, and that purpose, that legacy question, you know, why does it matter, right? And just by asking those questions, I think, you know, in the shower and the train, you know, we talked before this, you know, this call, you know, when you have a bit of time on your hands, when you're walking the dog, or you know, you wake up early at 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, spend some time to reflect, because I think there's a thing, you know, where you sit is where you stand. You know, the basis and identity basis is hugely important, and so that would be kind of one, you know, kind of align yourself with you know, integrity is a really interesting word. The way you know, it's been come to mean kind of honesty and probity and all of that. But for me, it's, you know, that your values and your thoughts and your words and your actions are integrated, are aligned. And, you know, if you take in Buddhism, you take the noble truths, you know, right thoughts, right actions, etc., right work. That are you aligned with yourself, right, first? And then second, you know, what difference can you make? You know, one of my favorite lines from sport is Team GB women's hockey. And one of the questions, or one of their kind of value statements, was just be the difference. You know, just be the difference. What difference? Well, that depends on your bigger questions, but be the difference. See if you can go out and make a difference, have some impact. And, you know, incrementally over time, the more you can make a difference in whatever environment you're in, you know, whether it's a podcast, you know, if you're going, you know, Connor, if you're going, I'm doing this podcast because I want to get famous, or I'm doing this podcast because it'll drum up some work, or I'll do this podcast because it'll kind of, you know, keep my foot in many camps all at one time, or if I do this podcast because I get to meet and talk to lots of interesting people, right? That's quite a self-referential thing. But if you do a podcast where you're going, I really want to make a contribution to the level of knowledge that's out there in the community, right? I want to be useful for people. I want to create an environment in which people learn and develop and soar and become more than they thought they were capable of becoming, right? You'll still get all of that other stuff. That's just a byproduct of doing something great. And so I think know who you are, and in answer to your question, you know who you are and what you stand for, what your values are. Who are you when you're authentically you? Are you aligned with yourself? Nothing more painful than not being that. And the second is, you know, what difference can you make every day? You know, when you walk into a room, how do you enhance that room? You know, do you come and you go, oh, shit, you know, sorry, I'll try and keep my language, but, you know, I won't actually. You know, you come in and go, the shitty weather that we're having today. And everyone goes, oh, yeah, you're right. Or do you come in and go, love the rain, you know, liquid sunshine, you know, not quite, but you know what I mean? We create the weather. We literally create the climate in a room. You know, what are you bringing? And by being, you know, I don't know how much you know about baseball, and again, a Kiwi, Brendan McCullum, coming into the England cricket team. You know, they're just trying to create a positive environment because they know that, you know, there's physiological reasons for it, that it releases dopamine. And when we're high and we have a lot of dopamine, we tend to be more reward oriented in our behavior. We go for it. You know, we're playing to win, not playing not to lose. When you're in a happier place, more positive place, can you know, are you part of the creating an environment in which other people can excel? Because, you know, if you're, you know, San Antonio Spurs, how can I make my teammates better? Brilliant mantra. How can I make my teammates better? Because, you know, if you're making them better, they're making you better. So I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I think know thyself, know what you stand for, and then look for ways to make a difference, would be my kind of thought of the week, let's call it. I don't know if it's my life philosophy, but it's certainly part of it. And it's kind of my thought of the week, I think, for today, that you know, you get those two things aligned, you know, you'll have a pretty good life. You'll be successful, I think, as a byproduct of you know, high character decision making.
And James, like you're a fountain of knowledge, I suspect legacy won't be the last time we'll hear of you. I mean, what are you working on now? What's next on the agenda?
I've got a number of projects going. I've had a couple of not false starts, but books that I've got to a certain point. I had a book that was due to be finished just before COVID, and then COVID kind of interrupted it. It was a book around Everest, and it involves some more research there. So I've started on another book called Ethos. Ethos is really looking at that narrative element and breaking it down, looking at the psychology and the neuroscience of why that's important, but through stories of great groups and individuals who have kind of changed their game, if you like, through that narrative element. And I have a number of other books I'm looking at that I'm just sort of stating a little bit. I have a consultancy, and we do work with corporates in terms of crystallizing their culture. So I'm doing quite a bit of work on that, and I work with various coaches at elite level on a kind of small, short project level, where I'll go in and help kind of sharpen the sword a little bit with them. And I do a bit of speaking. I'm sort of on the speaker circuit, which I enjoy. I enjoy the performance of that, my own high performance environment, if you like. But book-wise, I think the next one will be Ethos, and it'll cover some of the material we've been talking about today, actually.
I believe for the right ears, minds, and dispositions, you know, today's episode contains fountains of gold, you know, for people to take and implement in their own working environments, and not only working environments, but life as a whole. So, James, once again, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today.
Oh, well, listen, it's a real pleasure. You know, I hope I've been useful. You know, I hope I've been able to make a contribution. Thank you very much, Connor. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to make a contribution of some sort.